Hello. The Equality and Human Rights Commission has published guidance to the law surrounding access to single-sex spaces, such as changing rooms, toilets and hospital wards, and services such as rape counselling and domestic abuse shelters. The guidance makes it clear that it is lawful to refuse men, including men who identify as women, access to such places if it is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim, which could be for reasons of privacy, decency, to prevent trauma, or to ensure health and safety. I'm joined by the Institute's Sam Webster to help us understand the significance of what the EHRC has set out. Thanks, Sam. It's proved somewhat controversial, this guidance, as if it's doing something radically new. It's essentially setting out what is already in the law, isn't that right?
Indeed. It's surprising that it is so controversial. As you said, this is legislation that's been on the statute book for well over a decade.
We're talking about the Equality Act 2010 here, aren't we?
We are, and it's in line totally with guidance that the Christian Institute's been given to supporters and churches for a very long time. And it's very welcome that they've published some very practical guidance to help. It may just be helpful if I just set out what the Equality Act 2010 says.
Yeah, do that.
So it prohibits discrimination on grounds of nine different protected characteristics. And that includes in the provision of facilities or services to the public. Those protected characteristics include biological sex, and they include gender reassignment. And a person will have the protected characteristic of gender reassignment if they're proposing to undergo, are undergoing, or have undergone a process or part of a process for the purpose of reassigning their sex by changing physiological or other characteristics of sex. But as is the case with all the protected characteristics in the Equality Act, they are general prohibitions on discrimination, but there are also exemptions where those general prohibitions are disapplied. So this guidance is about where the provisions on biological sex and gender reassignment are disapplied, where service providers are providing single or separate sex facilities.
So just to be clear, what you're saying there is they aren't, although this guidance applies there, they're not somehow being singled out because the law has exemptions across the protected characteristics.
No, because the Equality Act also has exemptions that allow in certain circumstances discrimination on grounds of religion or belief or on grounds of age or whatever else. So no, it's not singling out any particular protected characteristic, but it's just saying that there are certain exemptions that can apply in certain limited circumstances.
And just so we're clear, what we're talking about here is applies to England, Scotland and Wales. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah.
But this is guidance, just to stress that point. This is guidance. It's not a manual that the EHRC are dishing out to go away and do this and do this and do this and then you're fine. It's guidance for people to apply. Can you just sort of explain?
Yes, I mean the role of guidance is not to tell the reader what to do in any particular given circumstance. It is to set out the factors, the guidelines that they need to have regard to when they are coming to a decision as to whether or not an exemption applies.
And there was a condition in what I said earlier, which is these can be applied if it is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. Can you just explain that for us in layman's terms?
Yeah. So the single and separate sex provisions in the Equality Act apply if particular conditions are satisfied. So that may be a joint service between the sexes would be less effective, or a member of the opposite sex may reasonably object to opposite members of the sex being present.
So what are we talking? So now, let's say single-sex swimming lessons, something like that. Would that be a relevant example?
So there would have to be a condition within the single or separate sex exemptions that would have to first apply. Once a condition applies, the service provider must also show that their restriction of those of the opposite sex is imposed because it is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. So there's two tests there: the condition plus the justification based upon legitimate aim and proportionality. You mentioned about swimming lessons. Well, of course, if it's permissible to have a single-sex swimming group because of the sex discrimination exemptions in the Equality Act, then it will also be permissible to restrict access to trans people if there is a legitimate aim, and if that legitimate aim is being advanced in a proportionate manner.
And in the example of swimming, of course, there are the considerations of perhaps decency, possibly privacy, and so on.
And you perhaps need to consider, what is the objective of the group in the first place? Why is this, say, a women's only swimming group? It may be that the way swimming is taught in that group may be different because only women are present. There may be particular needs. It may appeal to a wider constituency of women who want to attend that group, who feel able to.
So in order to achieve that aim of get more women into swimming, let's say, you need to take that stand. Well, let's run with this and apply it to churches, because there have been instances of men presenting as women in churches who expect, even demand to use the ladies' toilets to attend ladies' prayer meetings. And churches have had difficulties dealing with that.
Well, the ladies' prayer meeting example is an interesting one. What is the purpose of a ladies' prayer meeting? It's to focus on the needs that ladies have, which may be different to the way one needs to respond to the needs of men. So a prayer meeting where the ladies can share particularly personal prayer requests. There may be some ladies who would be unhappy about praying publicly in front of men who are present. And it may be that the purpose of having this women's prayer meeting may be totally denied and frustrated if biological men were allowed to be present in it. So yes, there's a legitimate aim of restricting trans people, and it would seem to me to be proportionate too if the purpose of that meeting would, as I say, be frustrated.
Is there any consideration of religious belief in all of this?
Yes, the Equality and Human Rights Commission very helpfully do touch on that in their guidance. In fact, I may just quote the paragraph. It's an example that's given in the guidance, and it's this. A community centre has separate male and female toilets. It conducts a survey in which some service users say that they would not use the centre if the toilets were open to members of the opposite biological sex for reasons of privacy and dignity or because of their religious belief. Mm-hmm. It decides to introduce an additional gender-neutral toilet. It puts up signs saying all users that they must use either the toilet for their biological sex or to use the gender-neutral toilet if they feel more comfortable doing so. So religion or belief, religious belief, is a factor which may be prayed in aid in justifying a restriction.
Okay, and this example here, I've got the same text in front of me, is a community centre, so it's a non-religious environment. So, I mean, it takes on perhaps a greater significance then if you're talking about services that are provided by services in the widest sense, being provided by a church.
Yes, so it's about the ultimate comfort of all service users, including the trans user. But as you say, in the context of a place of worship, religious sensibilities will be greater than you may find amongst a population who's using the local community centre for an event. So absolutely. I
mean, this isn't a long set of guidance, is it? I mean, people could reasonably probably read through this in sort of 10, 15 minutes or so. Yeah. So if you are a service provider, it's seems quite succinct in terms of what it's trying to get across. Is that fair?
Yes, indeed. I mean, you've obviously got to read through the sex discrimination exemptions first, and if they then apply, you can then look at the gender reassignment discrimination exemptions, which then attach on the back of the sex discrimination provisions. So yes. Okay.
Well, I mean, I mentioned earlier on there has been a certain amount of controversy around this, perhaps surprisingly, but Stonewall they've claimed that the guidance encourages a blanket ban, encourages illegal discrimination against transgender people. What would you say to that?
I think if anybody took time to read this guidance, they will see that this is not a blanket policy.
Right.
What it sets out is guidelines. It sets out the factors that should be borne in mind by a service provider, and that it's for service providers to develop their own policy as to how they apply those factors. So it encourages organisations, service providers, to have a policy. And I help churches very regularly develop such policies which set out the sort of factors they will have regard to, which will enable them to apply the law in a reasonable and in a fact-specific way when they are confronted with a particular situation that arises.
So if someone's watching this and perhaps they're trying to work through their own policy and are struggling with it, or just want to make sure that they get it right, because it's important to get it right, they can call up the Christian Institute and you'll be able to assist them.
I'll be delighted to do so, yes.
Well, Sam, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to me about this.
Thank you.